So in this segment of the show, we're going to be talking about Back to the Future Part 2. This is going to be a Rogues retrospective, or a retrospective, if you will. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about Back to the Future Part 2 in the context of how we originally saw it or how we originally heard about it, our thoughts about it then, and then we're going to talk about how we feel about the film today, having recently revisited it. So just real quickly here, I'm going to read just some real quick factoids about Back to the Future Part 2. I'll read the synopsis here real quick. This film is from 1989, and it says, after visiting the year 2015, Marty McFly must repeat his visit to 1955 to present disastrous changes to 1985 without interfering with his first trip. It's a very convoluted story, but I think that sums it up pretty decent. This was written by Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale. It was directed by Robert Zemeckis. Of course, it stars Michael J. Fox, Christopher Lloyd, Leah Thompson, Thomas F. Wilson, Elizabeth Shue, and a bit of a controversial recasting. We were talking about that earlier. Not really controversial, but I mentioned it that way anyway. James Tolkien, another recasting. Jeffrey Weiss as George McFly, and many other wonderful actors who are quite familiar with, one of which is, of course, the great Billy Zane, which I swear every time I watch these movies, I know he's there, but I always forget that he's in these movies until I see him. And it's like, oh, it's Billy Zane. The Phantom. The Phantom is in this movie. He is a Phantom because you forget he's in this movie and then he shows up. So he is the Phantom. So let's talk about how we first learned about Back to the Future Part 2. So I'm going to start with you, Eric. Tell us, how did you first hear about Back to the Future Part 2?
Well, this film I actually had the pleasure of seeing in the theater. We mentioned with the original Back to the Future, I did not see it in the theater. And I was way behind everybody else. All my friends had seen it. All my friends were talking about it. It was such a big deal, and I felt completely left out. And then finally, it came out on video, and then I got to see it. We mentioned, Dave, that was a common thing with the two of us. We saw it on video. And so we also saw it with the infamous "to be continued" at the end, which, of course, if you see it on Netflix, you're seeing the theatrical version, not the video version, the videotape version. So that "to be continued" isn't there, which is a little bit jarring for me. But I did see Back to the Future 2 in the theater with my dad. And because of that, it's got a special place in my heart. And I remember it was a real big deal to go see it. I was highly anticipating it. Everybody was kind of really, hyped about it, and everybody wanted to see it. I had some friends that got to see it before me, and I pretty much had them tell me all the spoilers because I didn't care. I just wanted to know. Everybody wanted to know what happened. And so it was a highly anticipated movie, and I did get to see it in the theater with my dad. And I remember loving it. Especially, what's interesting to me is especially the future scenes, which really aren't that prominent in the movie, honestly. But that was the big thing that stuck out in my mind as a kid, was the flying cars, the hoverboards, all the future stuff. What about you, Dave?
Well, the first time I started thinking about the idea of a sequel for Back to the Future Part 2 is as you mentioned, was seeing it on VHS, the "to be continued." So you knew there would be a Part 2. I'm going to be honest. I don't remember how I first heard about them making a sequel to Back to the Future. It made sense. There was obviously a bit of a delay until this film actually came out. I do remember seeing the movie poster because it was very iconic and striking. I did see this one in the movie theater, and I remember that I quite enjoyed it. It was in some ways what I imagined it would be, and in other ways it wasn't. When Doc Brown makes the comment about your kids, Marty, something's got to be done about your kids. You assume somehow the kids are going to be the villain of the story, and they're not really the villain of the story. This film, I think, is probably one of the more divisive of the Back to the Future sequels, because I know a lot of people don't really care for this one too much. I think it's because it takes such a dark twist. But in that way, it kind of reminds me of Empire Strikes Back, because Empire does the same thing.
That's interesting.
It takes a dark twist, and it goes in a direction you don't really expect it to go in. And it's a little jarring and it's a little shocking. But I think that's what helps make the payoff so entertaining in part three. So I'll be honest, I'm not one of those people that hates Back to the Future Part Two. I actually quite like Back to the Future Part Two. I mean, I don't, you know, when I hear, for example, like Star Trek fans diss on Star Trek Three: The Search for Spock, I don't understand that, because to me, 2, 3, and 4 go together. Like they go together, you know, like they're all part of that story, and it's a wonderful journey. And I see the Back to the Future films the same way. You know, the original Part Two and Part Three, they go together. It's one story, you know. So I don't in my mind anyway, I don't break Back to the Future Part Two off and go, oh well, this is the lesser. I didn't back then, and my feelings haven't changed too much today. But I don't remember how I originally heard about it. I do remember seeing the poster in the movie theater. And I do remember really thoroughly enjoying it and having a lot of fun with it. And it being a little dismayed that some people did not enjoy it as much as I did. And I was a little kind of stunned by how much some people disliked the film. Because I just thought
That's
it was
weird.
a lot of fun. Yeah.
I didn't know anybody that disliked the film. It was in my circles. It was universally accepted.
I know a lot of people that just skip over this movie and go right to part three. And you know, I wouldn't say this is my favorite of the three films, but I do quite enjoy it. And to me, I feel like it's integral. You obviously can't have three without part two, you know, at least in my mind anyway. So that's how I feel about the film. That's how I first heard about it. Again, I don't remember how I first heard about it, but I do remember seeing the movie poster in the theater. That's how I heard about a lot of movies, to be honest with you. I would be getting out of one movie and I'd be walking by and like, oh, what's this? This looks cool. I'll check this out. You know, those movie posters sold a lot of movie tickets with me. And it's funny because nowadays they don't do the same anymore. And I think it's because I think we've lost a little bit of the art of the movie poster, in my humble opinion. So we've talked about how we first heard about the film. And then, Eric, how did you feel about watching the film for the first time?
I loved it. You know, I thought it was amazing. Again, because I saw it when I was pretty young. I saw it in the theater when it came out. I was really impressed with the whole future thing. Which, funny enough, of course, it's now their future is in our past. And of course, our past is nowhere near as cool as this vision of the future. This vision of the future is amazing. And I really enjoyed it. And I thought they were very creative. As profits, they were way off. I mean, like almost 100% off. But as far as entertainment and visuals and all that, I love it. I still want my flying car. I still want my hover car. I still want my hoverboard. And by the way, I get so angry when they call those stupid little things. I don't even know what they're really supposed to be called, but you know what I'm talking about. They call them hoverboards. That's not a hoverboard. I say that to my kids all the time too. It's like, nope, it's got wheels on it. That isn't a hoverboard. I still want my hoverboard. What about you, Dave? Do you want your hoverboard?
I have some inner ear balance problems from time to time. I don't want a hoverboard. It sounds like it would be a painful experience for me. I will take a flying DeLorean though. I'll take that all day long, and twice on Sunday. So no, yeah, I totally hear what you're saying. Their vision of the future is a lot more fun, and I think that's what we could all use now, as a future with a little bit more fun. So very cool. All right. So we've talked about how we first heard about the film, and we talked about our initial impressions or how we felt about it back then. So now we're going to take a moment and we're going to talk about how we feel about the film today. So tell me, Eric, having recently revisited Back to the Future Part 2, how do you feel about the film today?
Well, I still enjoy it. I still enjoy it quite a bit. I think, for lack of a better term, it really is timeless. So, I mean, I enjoy it, even though obviously it's dated. There's no doubt it's dated because their future is now our past. And as I mentioned before, you know, our past was nothing like that. We didn't have the things that they have in that film. But still, it's an interesting idea of what the future could be. And I still cling to that idea that we could have things like that in the future, that we could have flying cars and things of that nature. So I'd still, in that regard, it's funny to me how that's still what I really like about the film is that vision of the future. But as an adult watching it, it's funny to realize how little of the film, that actually is. The future stuff is what, like maybe the first 15 minutes, if that, maybe 20 minutes. I mean, it's most of the film is not in the future. They end up going back to 1955. So it's kind of interesting in that regard that the part that really sticks out in my head and the part that I really kind of love this film for is so little of the actual film.
Yeah. So here's how I feel about the film today. So for me, I enjoy the 1950s elements where you're seeing it from a different angle. I think for me, this movie is very much about the future, their vision of the future, very much like you, Eric. But I also really love the really dark, twisted reality of 1985 because it always reminds me of the fun that they had with Mirror Mirror on Star Trek. The idea of showing us, an alternate, version gone horribly wrong. And that's one of the things I like about the sort of unfortunate, version of 1985 that they returned to, and how much things have kind of changed because of just a few, well, not a few, they're pretty major changes that Biff Tannen actually makes in the timeline, but it's just very, very interesting. And those are the elements I like about the film. I like the parts about the film a lot of people don't like about the film. I love all that dark, twisted stuff. And to get back to the actor who played Biff Tannen, he's really great in the 1985 scenes.
Can we go back to the dark part, because I didn't really talk about that, and I want to kind of get into that a little bit with you. One thing that
go ahead.
One thing that was unique for me about watching this recently is I watched it again with my daughter, because I saw the first one with my daughter, so she's seeing these movies for the first time, and I was a little worried about especially the murder of George McFly. As a parent watching my young daughter watching that, I was like, what is she going to think about this? Because I'm thinking in this context, this is really messed up. You know what I mean? That Biff, of course, at first we don't realize Biff murdered George McFly, but still the fact that, that Marty's father was murdered, that is something that's kind of a little tough to watch with a little kid. And I saw this as a little kid.
Oh, it is kind of tough, but I do think too, by some of today's standards, it might seem a little tame. But
when you're invested in the characters, because if you've watched the first movie,
no, I know,
and Crispin Glover's portrayal of George McFly is one of the standouts in Back to the Future. And by the way, I do want to talk about that controversy a little bit, before we finish up. But he's such a big integral part of the movie, and you really feel for him, because he had, like my daughter, her favorite moment was seeing him punch Biff. That was her favorite part of the movie, because it was like, it really built up to that, where you really feel for George McFly, and that moment where he punches Biff is just, that's just crowd pleasing entertainment. Everybody wanted to see that. It literally changes the course of his life. And then to see him, murdered in the second one, I think that's rough. I'm not saying it was a bad decision or anything. I'm just saying that it definitely is a rough part of the movie, at least for me.
No, it is. It is. And like I said, a lot of people have a lot of problems with this film because of the twisted turn that the new 1985 takes because of the events that occur. Throughout. Well,
remember, Marty asked the doc if they're in hell. Remember, it's like we're in hell or something like that.
Yeah. But again, I sort of like all that stuff, because you're at such a far point that the journey back, to a more bright, hopeful thing, it makes it, kind of more extreme. You know what I mean? And you want to get there faster, and and you want the timeline restored, and it kind of in terms of a story element, just that idea kind of even urges you to want to push forward faster. So no, I think it quite works for all of that stuff, and it doesn't bother me at all. Revisiting it, I still like a lot of that stuff. It doesn't really, again, for some whatever reason, it doesn't bother me a lot personally.
Well,
Even
Dave,
though
you were going to talk about Biff, and it has to be. I think it has to be talked about a little bit. What do you think about? Because you're saying that you really enjoy some of the darker tones and the contrast. Which, by the way, I agree with you. There is a great contrast between the new version of 1985 and their vision of the future. There's a great contrast there between how dark and depressing Biff's world is versus the future that they went to in the first part of the movie. There's a beautiful contrast there. But one thing that I think is interesting is the idea of Biff actually being a murderer. Because we've always thought of him as like a bully and kind of like a bad guy, but he's like evil. You know what I mean? That's kind of a twist.
well, no, but what I said, that's to me, that's what makes those moments really interesting for me personally as someone who's watching the film. And then I was going to talk about the actor because I feel like he does a really good job selling you on that. I never question at any moment that Biff isn't capable of doing those things, because his performance is such that you could totally see him doing that. So to me, in terms of the story they're telling and everything, I feel like it makes sense. And is it sort of a super villain sort of version of Biff Tannen, because he has shades of Lex Luthor, wouldn't you think?
Yes, that's a
In
nice
those
analogy.
moments,
A dumb Lex Luthor, a Lex
yeah,
Luthor
yeah,
with no brains. Yeah.
yeah. But he has shades of that kind of idea, that 1980s corporate raider version of Lex Luthor. He very much envisions and has kind of some of that at the core of his character. So to me, it just kind of worked because you want to see, it gives the heroes an even greater adversary to overcome. And it's interesting too, because just by defeating him, nothing's going to change. The stakes are so high. What they have to change is even greater than just that. So it's not like they can just stop Biff Tannen in the 80s and everything's fine. I mean, they have to do an awful lot of work to fix everything that's gone wrong. So it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun, I think, anyway.
Chris Roberts has an interesting idea here, and I did want to talk about some of this. He says, I have a feeling that killing him off that way, in regards to George McFly, killing him off that way was a way of saying F you to Crispin Glover over not wanting to be in the movie. And that is a good segue, Dave. I think we do have to talk about the controversy of recasting Crispin Glover. And of course, it was Jeffrey Weissman who was cast as George McFly in the second movie. And that's, of course, why he's upside down. And there is a ton of controversy about that move. Are you aware of that, Dave?
Well, I know he was recast, but I'm going to be honest with you. I don't really know much about why. They touch on it a little bit, if I remember correctly, in that Back to the Future documentary, but they don't get too far into it. But I did think it was weird that he didn't come back for this movie, but he was in 2 Charlie's Angels movies. I did find that a little bit strange.
Yeah, decisions. Actors don't always make the best decisions, and I don't know. I've heard Crispin Glover's version before. It's not fresh in my mind. He was on a podcast, and I feel like that might have been within the last year or two, not too long ago. And he kind of gave his side of things, and also talked about, for instance, nobody really questions why he wasn't on that United Apart special that I've been talking about. Everybody knows there's bad blood between him and the director and the entire production staff and all that kind of stuff. And of course, the first movie is not without controversy because Eric Stoltz was fired from the part of Marty McFly, Michael J. Fox's part, which I would still, we were talking about the Snyder cut earlier. I kind of want to see a Eric Stoltz cut of Back to the Future. I think that would be kind of interesting. But in regards to the recasting of George McFly, I think it's interesting because I've met Jeffrey Weissman. So I have a kind of different perspective on this because I think most people they just sort of naturally take Crispin Glover's side, and of course there was a huge controversy because they made Jeffrey Weissman look like Crispin Glover to the extent that Crispin Glover actually ended up in like a lawsuit that was supported by SAG in terms of using the likeness of actors when they're not in a movie. It's kind of considered like a precedent-making case. But Jeffrey Weissman is a really interesting guy. The way that I met him was we had a local sort of like media expo in Tempe, Arizona, and he was doing like an actors workshop for that. And he did a really good job. Jeffrey Weissman was also in Unforgiven, and he had a lot of stories about Clint Eastwood. So it was a lot of fun to meet him and talk to him. But there's definitely a huge controversy there. And I think both actors have suffered in their careers as a result of this controversy.
Well, that's interesting. Like I said, I didn't know too much about it, other than that he was recast, because even though they try to make it kind of seamless where you don't question it, it's pretty obvious it's not the same person.
That led to a lawsuit because he was saying that they were trying to make it like that was him.
Yeah,
that was the meat of the lawsuit. And I think, like I said, there's definitely been pushback from that. I think in terms of the career, I think of both actors.
Yeah, I could see that.
Now, do you know anything about the whole deal with Leah Thompson? I'm sorry, not Leah Thompson, but with Claudia Wells and Elizabeth Shue? Because I don't know anything about that. Why that happened?
No, I all I've heard is on the documentary they talk about, and they don't spend a lot of time with it, but like the producers wanted to go in a different direction. I don't know if they thought that she couldn't, like acting wise, like handle having to have that much more material, having to,
but she doesn't. She's barely in the movie. That's, you know what I mean? She's barely in this. That's one thing that stuck out to me watching this again, because I love Elizabeth Shue. Elizabeth Shue is like, ever since Karate Kid, she's another one. Like I talked about the big crush I had on Leah Thompson, which by the way started with Red Dawn. Red Dawn is what started me on Leah Thompson. And then I had a huge crush on Elizabeth Shue from Karate Kid, because Karate Kid was a big part of my growing up. I saw that movie in the theater. So I was really shocked at how little she's in this movie. She's barely in it.
Well, and that was one of the things I thought was really odd about her recasting, is the fact that she isn't in the film very much. But when you initially see her, I remember when I originally saw it, I don't think I made the connection that it was someone that was different. That's the thing that's really weird.
I didn't either. I guarantee I didn't.
I didn't immediately. All I could think of is like, well, she looks pretty different from the last movie, but I just assumed it was the same. I didn't even bother to go back and check when I first saw Back to the Future Part 2. I didn't even give it a second thought. And then, for me, Elizabeth Shue, she's been in a lot of great stuff, but for me, Karate Kid is still the be all end all. I would love to talk about the Karate Kid movies on the show. I love Karate Kid. I think a lot of people know that because a lot of my quotes, like on my DeviantArt and stuff, is it's weird. It's either a quote from the Punisher, Yoda, or Mr. Miyagi. so we're a collection of
Yoda and Mr. Miyagi make a lot of sense. The Punisher is where you kind of go a little weird, I think.
Well, I mean, I feel like Dolph Lundgren has some interesting lines in that his Punisher movie that I like to quote. When Louis Gossett Jr. is like, "What do you call however many murders in 5 years?" And he gets all kind of serious and goes, "Work in progress." I like that line, "Work in progress." So
I like that too. That's cool.
So yeah, there's a lot of fun quotable stuff from that movie. I love that movie. I know a lot of people hate it, but I love that movie. But no, Elizabeth Shue, big huge deal for me because of Karate Kid. I love Karate Kid. I'm constantly trying to explain things sometimes to coworkers, and I feel like I'm trying to be Mr. Miyagi a lot of times. No, yeah, it is weird that she doesn't have, but the only point I'm making is that I feel like she does have a little bit more to do than the other actress did, but it still doesn't make sense. Um, but it is what it is. It's kind of an unusual thing. I don't know if their original intention was maybe they thought they were going to do more with that part, and then as they pulled the film together, it turned into something else, and they went, oh well, I guess we didn't need to. I don't know. It never really made sense to me why they recast the other actress. But I like Elizabeth Shue enough. I didn't miss her, unfortunately for her. So no, yeah, that's kind of the weird thing. There is those two kind of recastings, and I don't know why they recast the other actress who played Jennifer. I don't know why. And I don't think they make a big deal out of it either in a lot of the things I've seen. I'm sure in somewhere there's a YouTube video that breaks it down. So my apologies that I haven't seen that YouTube video yet, but I don't know why. So is there anything else that you want to talk about the film in terms of like controversy or curious things about it, or are we good to kind of talk about how we feel about the film today here just real quick?
Yeah, I think it's good to talk about, just how we feel about it today.
Okay, cool. All right. So we do have a couple of another quote here real quick from Chris Roberts. He said, or comment, he said he kind of enjoyed that Punisher. I'm assuming he's talking about the Dolph Lundgren one, but felt the Thomas Jane version was better. Well, the Thomas Jane version is definitely more a actorly take on the Punisher. They spent a lot of time giving us the gravitas and the pain that he's obviously going through. And they up the stakes too, because in the Thomas Jane Punisher movie, spoiler word for anyone who hasn't seen it, they don't just kill like, his wife and his kid. They wipe out his entire family, cousins, uncle, third cousins, that family friend who's always hanging around. Man, they killed all of them in that movie. So he's got a lot of baggage he's working through. And I quite like, to be honest with you, I like all the Punisher movies. I feel like the Ray Stevenson one, Warzone, is probably the closest to the comics. But I liked every single version of the theatrical Punisher movies for different reasons. I always apply this idea, I've brought this up before on the show, the concept of looking at it as if it's an Elseworld story, because it's easier to enjoy it for just what it is. What if the Punisher was, circumstances were slightly different and you get this version? But I like a lot about that movie. So, but we're getting way off topic. So let's get back.
Yeah, a little bit there, Dave.
A little bit off topic.
A little bit there.
So in terms of revisiting Back to the Future Part 2 today, I still thoroughly enjoy it. I still like it a lot. Like I said, I feel like it's important. Back to the Future Part 2 and Part 3, I feel like they go together in the same way that Star Trek, 2, to 4 go together. They're important. You have to have all of them for it to kind of work, in my mind. Has a lot of fun stuff. I love all the future stuff at the beginning still. Is some of it kind of dated, especially when you consider the fact that their futures in our past? Of course, it's obviously dated at times. But I still don't think it really takes away from it being a fun movie. And really great performances from all the various actors. Special effects are kind of fun. There's a few shots I don't think hold up quite as well as I remember. This is one of those films, I do watch it probably about once every 2 or 3 years, because I do make my way through all the Back to the Future films. I don't rewatch this one as much as I rewatch, obviously, the original or even the third one. But I don't consider this film any less. The original one, the original Back to the Future, is my personal favorite of the three. I quite enjoyed Back to the Future Part 2. I enjoyed it then, and I feel the same way about it today. I would recommend, if you have Netflix, because this is on Netflix, if you have Netflix and you're thinking about revisiting Back to the Future, I say watch all three. Watch all three. Don't skip over part 2 because someone in your household thinks it's okay. Go ahead and watch it. It's an important part of the story. So tell me, Eric, how do you feel about Back to the Future Part 2 today?
I enjoy it. I think it's an enjoyable film. As I mentioned, I think it is timeless. And the one issue that I do have with it, you kind of touched on it. This film could use a remaster. The effects are a little dated, particularly the flying effects and things of that nature. Some of them actually work quite well, but some of them are a little jarring from a contemporary eye. So that would be my major criticism of the movie, is that some of the effects are a little bit dated. Some of the effects work very well, such as the hoverboard, the way that they did the hoverboard scenes and things like that. They shot them in such a way that you, for the most part, it's pretty seamless. But there are some other shots, particularly of the DeLorean when it's flying, and there's other issues here and there that could use some sort of a remaster. And maybe I'm a little spoiled because of the original Star Trek remasters. But that would be my only real criticism of the film. I will say that my daughter didn't have any criticisms like that. Like, she wasn't like, oh, that looked fake and that's stupid or whatever. She just enjoyed it. So that, I think, says it all right there.
Yeah, I agree. And that's, in all honesty, that's the most important thing, is that hopefully when people revisit these films, especially the films that we do the retrospective with, hopefully they'll enjoy them. I can definitely say Back to the Future Part 2 is a good film, and you won't regret watching it, especially when you watch it in conjunction with, obviously, the original one, which I consider to be a classic, and then obviously the third one, which kind of brings it all together.